Our Old Testament lesson is from the 30th Psalm. I will extol you, O Lord, for you have drawn me up and did not let my foes rejoice over me. O Lord my God, I cried to you for help, and you have healed me. O Lord, you brought up my soul from Sheol, restored me to life among those gone down to the pit. Sing praises to the Lord, O you his faithful ones, and give thanks to his holy name. For his anger is but for a moment, his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes with the morning. As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved. By your favor, O Lord, you had established me as a strong mountain. You hid your face, I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I cried, and to the Lord I made supplication. What profit is there in my death if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it tell of your faithfulness? Hear, O Lord, and be gracious to me. O Lord, be my helper. You have turned my mourning into dancing. You have taken off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, so that my soul may praise you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever. New Testament reading is Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So he went with them, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhage for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. And then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years old of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So says the word of the Lord.
Pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts together be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. As a chaplain, I often find myself sitting in waiting rooms. Waiting rooms are hard places to be in. especially those in hospitals. I often find myself sitting with families in waiting rooms, waiting for a surgery to start, waiting to hear news, waiting for a surgery to end, waiting to hear what comes next, waiting for family to arrive, just waiting. I often say that waiting is the hardest part, because wrapped up in it is all of the uncertainty, all of the unknown. There's nothing to do. Just wait. I have also found that it's in waiting rooms that Jesus often shows up in unexpected ways. We never know when Jesus is going to show up in our lives. He has a way of just arriving when we need him to. Although, if I am being honest, it's not always when I want him to, or even in the way that I want him to. And yet, he always does, just when we need him most. In the passage read this morning, Jesus has returned to Israel after traveling. He's been bouncing back and forth all throughout the countryside between Israel and the land of the Gentiles, performing miracles, teaching. The crowds have already gathered. They have been waiting for him. And within moments of him arriving, we hear of a sick little girl, the daughter of a leader in the community, leader of the synagogue. Her father has been waiting for Jesus, and when Jesus arrives, he begs Jesus to come with him to heal his daughter. Jesus agrees. But the crowds have gathered, and they are thick with people. People pressing in on Jesus as he winds his way through the streets on his way to this sick little girl. And yet, in the midst of all these crowds, he feels an energy leave him, a change in his body. He stops to understand what has happened and is faced with a woman who's been suffering for 12 long years. The author of Mark tells us that she has spent everything she has on doctors, and they have all been unable to help her. She is now worse than she was before. And in her desperation, she too has been waiting for Jesus, knowing that if she could just get close to him, if she could just touch him, she would be healed. And she was right. She took it upon herself, reached out, and touched Jesus. And in doing so, she was healed. The passage ends where it began, with a sick little girl who, while waiting for Jesus, has died, according to those waiting with her. But instead, when Jesus arrives, he heals her. This passage is a tale of two women who are suffering. Both are unnamed. This little girl and what is commonly known as the hemorrhaging woman. The little girl is 12 years old, the same amount of time the woman has been sick. The little girl comes from this powerful, privileged family. Her father is a leader in the community. They most likely have wealth, with many connections and supporters. Indeed, we hear of a group coming from her sickbed who have been standing by, waiting for help, while the hemorrhaging woman is poor and alone. The text tells us she spent all she had and has gotten worse, suggesting perhaps she once had wealth, but is now poor. She does not have anyone standing by her hoping for healing, no one advocating for her, no one waiting with her. These two women could not be much more different, yet both found themselves waiting for Jesus, waiting for healing. And Jesus doesn't pick one over the other. He does not brush the woman aside to get to the little girl, nor does he abandon the little girl after others have come to claim she has already died. This little girl with all of her supporters and wealth, and this woman who is poor and alone, Jesus gives his full attention to both. Nothing separating them from Jesus. The waiting ends for each of them. Waiting is an equalizing state. No amount of money or power can make the waiting faster or easier. We all must wait. Like I said before, I've been in many waiting rooms. Indeed, as a chaplain, that's where much of my ministry occurs. Waiting rooms are full of concerned, worried, distracted people, knowing that something is happening somewhere else, but that they have no control over what's going on. They wait, hoping for the best, unsure of what comes next. My mother recently had surgery, and it was a long day for both of us. We knew that she'd be staying in the hospital a few days afterwards, so she had packed her bag, and we arrived in the very early hours of the morning. By the time she was wheeled in for surgery, we had sat in 4 different waiting rooms. The waiting room for registration and admission so they could confirm her information, make sure she was who she was, the insurance. We then moved to the waiting room to get called up to the pre-op floor, and then there was the waiting room of the pre-op floor. And finally, I settled in to the final waiting room, the one I would be in for the next several hours as that surgery and recovery took place. And I looked around at my fellow waiters. Families and loved ones prepared with books and phone chargers, bags filled with odds and ends to try to fill the time. The most desired seats along the walls next to the outlets so that you could charge that coveted phone. Cups filled with coffee, getting cold, food wrappers. We waited. A large TV hung on the wall with 8-digit numbers representing each of our loved ones, highlighted in different colors. Code words to let us know what stage they were in the process. Brightly colored pagers hung around our necks or stuck out of pockets, the way the surgical team would let us know what was going on. We waited. Jesus showed up for me in many forms that day. The first was in the form of our pastor who came to offer a prayer before surgery. Jesus also came in the form of my aunt and uncle who sat with me for that 12-hour day, waiting. But Jesus also comes in unexpected ways. And that day, for me, Jesus came in the form of a work crew assigned to fix the overhead speakers. As my fellow waiters and I sat in this waiting room, a high-pitched tone started to sound. Constant, just The workers went from one speaker to one speaker to one speaker, and the tone remained. After 20 minutes, we started to look around at each other, our fellow waiters. I felt a smile crack on my face. How can this tone still be going? Someone else. They got it to stop for a second. It came back. How long is this going to last? The workers shot apologetic looks, trying to problem solve, identify whatever speaker was the culprit. As another 10 minutes passed, I started to find myself chuckling. I felt like I should be looking for the candid camera. This has to be a joke, right? Finally, and I'm not sure how long this actually took, the tone stopped. Quiet shouts of joy came from all corners of this waiting room. Others of us laughed. Jesus had shown up, providing distraction and and humor in a waiting room full of anxious people. This was definitely not how I expected Jesus to come. And yet, it's what I needed. I needed something to break the tension, something to distract myself, to laugh at, something to connect with others sitting in that room. Jesus showed up several ways that day, each one filling a different need that I had, even if I didn't realize it. Some were in those expected ways, but others in ways I never could have planned for. And looking back, I am grateful for each. Grateful for how Jesus showed up that day and in the days that followed, providing comfort and peace. In the passage read this morning, we hear of many who have been waiting for Jesus to arrive. A sick little girl surrounded by loved ones, waiting for Jesus to come and heal her. But he doesn't show up when they want him to. Indeed, they believe he is too late. And yet, he arrives when she needed him, and in the presence of those most dear to her, she is healed. And then the sick woman, who's been suffering for 12 long years, waiting for a cure. She is poor, and she is alone. And as Jesus walked past her, she reached out and touched him. Surprised by what happened, he doesn't just keep going. He stops, and he blesses her and the healing that she has received. Jesus once again shows up in those unexpected ways, his presence, his love, being all that is needed. Both the little girl and the sick woman have been waiting for Jesus, for the comfort and the peace that he brings, for the hope of what comes next. And in that waiting, he arrives when we need him most, not necessarily when we want him or in the way that we expect, but he shows up no matter what, no matter who we are, he shows up. Amen.